3.6, if I'm not mistaken. I see this here that's allocated as almost 2 million. Hit the button.
A Tuesday. There we go. Um, so what I think what you're referencing is the budget or the construction estimate for the first phase of the pipeline replacement. And if you recall, we are anticipating receiving approximately 2.7 million from the state as a part of that project. So again, as we talked, this is a $72 million project, and so we have some other ad alternatives or option bid alternatives that we're going to put into that packet as our idea and plan if we secure this extra funding, so that we could potentially add those extra pieces to the first phase of pipeline replacement with the influx of the ARPA funds if available.
Was this 1.998 million the same staff recommendation that was presented prior?
I don't believe it was, but again, I think in looking at that and working through those things, and I know based off some discussions, trying to choose my words carefully here, right, of increasing some of the budget offsets out of the available ARPA funds, right, drop that number down. So initially,
Yeah, I think so in the initial one, I think it hinges down to whether you're gonna get the 2.7 or not, right? So if you get the 2.7 to do the first phase, you needed just over 1 million. And I think what was there was 1.1.
Because it was a big question mark
right.
whether or not those funds were going to be available, correct?
it is still a question mark whether those funds are going to be available. And again, I think in looking and working, I think increasing some of the budget dollars in the general fund to secure those and provide some movement, right? I'm going to let Joel speak to that most, is what potentially
Right.
dropped that number down.
Yeah, and I think what we have in the previous discussion, the 24-25 mitigation, it was recommended to be, I think we had put 1.5, 1.6, and there was a desire by the committee to increase it. So we recommended 2 and then put the balance into MD10A. So the whatever remaining we were gonna put into MD10A, but no lower than 1.1. That's what we recall. But I think in a subsequent discussion, Public Works, they were gonna try to leverage the fact that if the board approves 1.9 million of ARPA funds, is to leverage the state and saying, can you solidify the 2.7 because we're ready to move? And if that doesn't quite happen, then we can always go back to the drawing board and what can be done with the 1.9. Can something be done with the 1.9? Or is it hard and fast? We have to find the rest of the 1.7, right?
Yeah, and I guess just for some clarity as well, right? When we looked at this and we reached out and it was, hey, give us a proposal. And so we did look and say, and you'll recall the initial submittal that Public Works provided to admin had some other funding and some other projects, right? We weren't at that point, Public Works was not aware of what was unallocated, what was available within. So it was basically, hey, here's the needs that we see fit, and now we've scaled that back to meet the actual unallocated dollars, I think, in working with admin on that.
So what's the time frame that we would know whether or not that 2.7 from the state was secured or not?
Again,
Jared,
the
don't
hope
look at me like that.
they're aware. We will follow up with them that we believe we've secured the funding to build out and construct and do all of the identified phase 1 improvements. The hope and goal would be to have this thing out to bid and under construction by summer. So we need that commitment from the state here in the next 30 to 60 days. Is that realistic? The state fluctuates, and with the state budget the way it is, it wouldn't shock me if we don't hear that. And then we may proceed if we get the funding available from ARPA. We may proceed and get a project bid out at that 1.9 million. And then when the state money comes in, we could do some adults under that construction. So we'll have to get a little creative on some of those things, but we're going to push the state. And I think getting the allocated funds identified to do that first phase will help to push that, right? And tell the state, hey, we can get these funds out, we can get them done, send us that money, is the hope.
So, I mean, obviously my concern is if they don't provide the funding, if they claw back what they had asked for, in my opinion, we should be expecting the worst and hoping for the best. So that's why, I really did like that original number. And if we get the money, we can have some sort of return at that time, and we'd still have enough time to allocate those additional dollars by July or even August. We could still allocate those dollars elsewhere.
Right.
But that's my concern.
So what
I
we
don't
can,
have I don't have faith in the state. I don't have faith that they're gonna, keep those funds available for us. I don't operate that way, and I'm not gonna assume that we are gonna get those funds, especially seeing where we are right now. Obviously, we can leverage as much as we can, but the reality of the situation is we shouldn't be banking on that.
And I don't think we are. I don't want to cut Joel off there. We have an ability to spend the 1.9, right? If we get awarded ARPA to go out there, we can spend that money, and we're not going to hold. It's better than nothing at the end of the day, right? We got $72 million worth of need. This is a start, and we've identified phases of build out that this funding would provide that gap to get those projects out there.
as an alternative, what we can do is that $2 million could be a dual purpose. Like assume 1.7 of it, because you're gonna need an additional 1.7, right? It's 3.7 for the full phase one.
3.7.
3.7? Yeah. So it could be a dual purpose where it's first, the 1.7 is allocated for the full MD10A phase one. But if the funding for the state comes through, it reverts back to potentially 24-25 budget mitigation. So that way there's a dual layer recommendation with a primary of getting the phase one MD10A project done. That's an alternative.
Well, my recommendation would be to allocate the 3.7, and if we get state funds, we can reallocate up to what we get.
I hear where you're coming from. I'd like to get a little bit more, if we were going to go that direction, I'd like to, for me, I feel more comfortable getting more of a specific breakdown as far as what that would look like. If the roughly $2 million was all that was there, what would that do? And then, maybe also provide what the first phase would look like as well. I think that made me feel a little more comfortable about if I were to move forward with taking the general fund services. I look at, the general fund projected year-end deficit 23-24, and then also the preservation of general fund services. There's been a lag in terms of issues created by COVID. Initially when these funds came out, we allocated them certain places, but, inflation raised its ugly head, and it really created a lot of issues for us today, because we're looking at, well, it's X number of days down the road, but that's the lag effect. And so, I would like to also take a look at what that would mean in terms of, the loss of certain general fund services. So just to kind of do a little bit more of a complete analysis, if we were to consider reallocating some of those general fund, that $2 million.
Karen, could you pull up the computer? So I have added a column and what it could look like if we shifted and provided the full 3.7. The thing that I would just let the committee know is that our ability, I guess we could go either direction, right? So from staff standpoint, with putting our hats, our budget hats on, the 3 million is the authority we have under the $10 million, no question, quote unquote, no questions asked line item in ARPA, right? So even if we kept the 2 million on preservation of general fund service, they would have to go to specific projects that are ARPA eligible. So it cannot be used as part of that $10 million revenue replacement anyway. So for us, the priority is the 3 million. And the reason why it's a specific amount is that's the room we have left from the 10 million pot. And what we've paid under those are various projects like the Sheriff's Assigned Vehicle Program, I believe Fire Station 3, or, a lot of the stuff that doesn't fit cleanly. We've paid under that 10 million. So anyway, the committee recommendation, if we were to fully fund phase 1 of the MD-10A, would leave 300,000 from the 24-25 preservation and general fund services under ARPA. And again, it would have to be sorted out by December 2024 anyway, right? Because we have to obligate it. So anyway, all this to say that I think if the committee is comfortable in fully funding it, there is the issue of time, right? So, we'd love to have the flexibility for the general fund, but we'd also hate to not commit it and the funds, go back and revert back to Treasury. So I don't know how the other committee members.
Do we
Well, I have
anticipate, do we anticipate that we'll hear anything from DWR before the state actually figures out its budget for the most part in June?
Yeah, excuse me, I reached out to them already and I'm trying to get a response, but I mean, the initial conversation with them was that they were looking at that. They weren't sure that that was necessarily gonna be something that would be affected in this current budget, but certainly in budgets moving forward. So they're making those decisions right now. And just sent another message while we're sitting here asking for an update if I can get update on it. So
So is this, Jared, is this money then from this fiscal year, or is this like a rolling pot of money that they're gonna try to claw back everything to fill their $38 billion hole?
So this is from this fiscal year. The issue that they're running into, as I understand it, is that there are projects that are funded this fiscal year that are increased in cost due to inflation and various things. And so they're trying to make sure they cover all those projects. And so, so they're looking wherever they have extra money that they haven't actually approved funding agreements on at this point to help fill that gap.
Okay, so if we were able to tell them today, we have the money, we need yours, when do you think you'll get an actual like final answer? Because right now my tendency would be, let's allocate the money to MD-10A, let's push the state hard to give up the
Sure.
money from this year. We're waiting on you, state, not waiting on us. And then if they fall apart, we spend our own money, and if they don't fall apart, then as long as it's before December, whatever, I
24th,
don't,
yeah.
it's the 20 something, it's not really the 31st, I don't think, where we have to have it allocated. We'd still be in fine shape to reallocate the money and the project would get done.
Yeah, I mean, what I've been told is that within the next couple of months is when they'll make all the final decisions is what they're looking at. But I certainly, I wouldn't disagree that if we can tell them we have the money to put forward to match with that, bring your piece. Because that's been the questions to us is, okay, you have even with the scaled down, you have a 6 point something million project. Where are you going to get the money for the rest of it? And we've tried to build it with add alternates to keep the base at about 3.7, with the understanding that they're bringing the 2.7, we would match that with the additional, million and a half.
Okay, so I guess going back to Joel's question, I would say that, as a committee member, I would support that third column that you created. And we can always revisit. We just don't want to start spending, I would think, beyond the 1.998 until we know for sure that the state is 100% not going to commit any money to the MD10A project, and then we have to spend it. I guess we have to spend it.
Then there's the additional requests as well. We have the, what is it, $30,000 for the North Fork something.
Yeah, there was $30,000 for the North Fork Community Development Council, and $150,000 from Eastern Madera County Foundation, which I guess if the committee,
I don't have this North Fork. Is it on?
I think it's a
no,
verbal.
it's not in the paperwork that was provided, Supervisor. It's just been a verbal discussion between myself and one of the council members regarding some issues that they're having, and I thought that it was appropriate for ARPA because lack of HVAC may ultimately deprive them of some rental income, and we certainly want them to be able to support themselves over the long haul.
I think that's a reasonable request.
And I think it's certainly up to the committee if the committee wants to consider the full $150,000 request for Eastern Madera County or some modified version of that. I've provided you the request letter, a very rough summary budget, and then a letter from Supervisor McCauley. So perhaps there's things in that budget that don't need to be funded with ARPA.
You know, I think it'd be difficult to determine that right now. And I'm looking at, you know, if we're going to be looking at fully funding MD10, I think it would be reasonable based on this request. I mean, they can go back and go through the budget, but, or maybe we can, but at least have it budgeted and take some action on it.
And just to go back a little bit, what was the reason for leaving the 100K in the disadvantaged communities box?
Yeah, we were gonna work with Public Works to see if we can, using that 100K to do some school crossing improvement signage in those 5 communities with the remaining 100,000.
And one other thing, I guess, apologies that I would bring up. So just a little bit back on the MD10A, right? So we are working with the numbers that you see are working on based off of engineer estimates, right? So that project has not gotten bid out yet. It should be out and we can bid it out next month, and then we'll actually have firm numbers. So with any luck, maybe it comes a little bit under that 3.6 or 3.7 million as well. I'll just let the committee know that as well on that. So for what it's worth. And on the 100, yeah, I mean, we had looked at trying to get some pedestrian school safety improvements out there to Lavina, Easton, Arcola, Ripperton area, Fairmead as well, potentially with that. Some enhanced crosswalks, some beacons, some of those aspects.
Is there any reason why we didn't include that in the latest round of the CDBG stuff with the other safe pathways to school, or is there any reason we can't include it now instead of using these funds?
Yeah, we can certainly find that money with other sources potentially there, right? Fairmead is seeing a lot of improvements. We've already put some improvements out there at that intersection. So it is possible. Certainly those programs, there's more buckets to look towards than some of these other projects that you have up here on the list.
So I would be in favor of taking those funds and funding the EMCF funding request. The other question I have is of those, you know, the time frame from when we get an answer from DWR to the December deadline to allocate these funds, do we have enough of those, I guess lack of a better term, shovel-ready projects for the general fund? Do we have enough projects that we can allocate within that time period?
Yeah, we're
if-
gonna
if
have
we
to
did
get
get that money.
creative, because we're gonna have to get creative and in what we fund. So one thing, I can't answer that right now. But it would be likely looking at, for example, activities by the sheriff's office. If we were trying to put it through the general fund and see what relates to like what would qualify as emergency response, like for disasters and that kind of stuff. If they have lingering costs there, we can swap for a disaster.
Mhm.
But it would be really digging deep. It would be a lot harder to than the 10 million, but it's not impossible because they've added some broad categories. So it could be looking at their
I mean,
home-
I'm just saying, I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm just
Yeah.
saying the $2 million of the most recent staff recommendation. I
Right.
mean, it was there for a reason, right? So you feel pretty confident and comfortable that you could allocate at least $2 million into whatever project is necessary.
Yes, Supervisor, that would be the goal, because we feel that that's a reasonable number that we can find activities to qualify, but without specifically looking at it, we don't have 2 million. We were certainly just leveraging considering how bad the deficit projections are. I mean, and if anything that we can get, we would take. But matching it to activities.
This is really, I
yeah.
mean, the biggest
Yeah.
thing that I'm looking at. I want to at least allocate the full funding for phase 1 of MD10A, assuming we don't get any money. And if we get money, we can put money back in towards, the general fund, the preservation of general fund services. Because we'll know by July, August. Is August through December or whatever the cutoff, is that enough time? If that money does become available to allocate those funds?
I'm sorry,
Elsewhere?
to the general fund, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'd be starting to look at it now, right? So in case we have to pull the trigger on it, right?
Right.
Because as we negotiate departments' budgets through the 24-25 process, we're starting to take note of where we can leverage some of those. I will say, so to clarify though, that under the committee recommendation column here, this 3.7 should fully fund that phase 1 in the absence of the state funding, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think as a committee member, I'm comfortable with this approach, with the understanding that if it isn't needed fully, and then we could use the funds in the general fund, that we could always revisit it. And I think at this point, considering, as this is speaking as one committee member, I feel better, figuring out if we can leave the 100,000 and see if there's other projects that we can do in those communities. Just simply because we've been actively engaged with them, and if we could do something that relates to mobility, might keep the criticism away on the reallocation, is our thought.
I'm not necessarily as affected by the criticism since they get more money per capita than anybody else in this entire county. So
Done.
done.
Okay. So I think there was a discussion we had recently and in regards to disadvantaged communities, and I'm thinking of Fairmead and Lavina. And I think we're working on some kind of a summary of what has been allocated to Fairmead and Lavina. And I'm looking at it just as a quick reference for people like myself who, have opportunities to engage in conversations with our friends from these communities. And at least it would give me some some specific data and so forth to educate or to continue to educate. And that's from all different sources,
Yeah.
HSR and
Yes, thank
whatever.
you. And that's certainly Joel and Jessica and the Public Works team. We spoke last week on, when we do roll to the board, ensuring that we have quite a bit of dialogue as to what has been expended or
Mhm.
what is committed to being expended within primarily Lafina and Fairmead,
Mhm.
whether it be from county ARPA, broadband dollars already expended, or allocated and identified projects via high-speed rail or active transportation planning grants received in Lavina for improvements. So I think we'd envision bringing a pretty comprehensive packet before the board when this recommendation from the committee rolls up to them
Okay.
to basically spell that out and have that part of that. I don't want to speak for Joel, but I think that was
No, that's accurate. That's what we talked about. That's what we're gonna present. That's part of the
Mhm.
board pack.
That'd be excellent because there's so many times that, again, we have the wonderful opportunity to engage and sometimes I feel like I'm at a loss. I know that there's money that's been allocated and I know there's been money that's been invested, but what is it and what are those projects? And I can visualize, but that would be very helpful. Thank you. And the other thing is, in regards to MD10A, Supervisor Wamhoff, and others here are very familiar with the system and the issues and the problems. But as we move forward with bringing it to the board, I would like to have a side discussion or side description about what are we talking about with MD10A. Have not myself, I'm not totally familiar with the project and the deficiencies and what phase one is and what phase two is. I know that there's been a lot of committee work and certainly Supervisor Wamhoff has been working on it and diligently and others, and it's really, really important. And I think that that would help me just kind of wrap my arms around. I'm not saying I'm against. I'm actually for fixing the system. I just would like to know more about it. What is it, and rather than it's this thing in the ranchos. Well, what does that mean? And are there more wells involved? How many miles of pipeline? What are the how much are people paying? It just kind of give me a better idea. So if somebody were to ask me, then I rather than I'm not quite sure. I don't know. So I would appreciate that.
And we'll apologize to the committee. I think in the previous meeting, we did have that printout and we failed to provide that today. There's a summary of it, but we for sure will have a very beefy board letter when we take this to the full board.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing that up because, yeah, unless you know some of the details about it, you don't really understand, what condition it's in and as a result of its condition, what it's causing to the residents there, the blowouts that are happening, the overnight, the workers that are there, all hours of the night doing patchwork on this system and the amount of overtime and excess costs that having a deficient system is actually causing. So I think if staff could just prepare something like that, that would be really helpful for everyone to kind of just wrap their head around what the problem actually is.
absolutely.
That'd be excellent. Yeah, we're set up in these districts and it seems like, the supervisor that's in that district, hears about, more and it's more intense discussions, which is definitely appropriate, but then the others are here to vote on it. And it's kind of like sometimes the information is a little bit lacking in terms of what that is. And with myself, I'm interested in the entire county as far as what some of the things are, regardless of District 5 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And so that would be a good thing. So thank you.
I just want to clarify how the other committee members, do we remove the 100,000 remaining? We have consensus on that? Or
I like to
just
see it remain,
I-
only because of some of the things that we've talked about in the past and in well, again, the Supervisor Wamhaus point, a lot of money's been poured into these
Yeah.
committees, but again, I don't know what that is, as far as,
Okay.
what it, and what other funds are coming in. And I think it would be a good thing just to keep there as a placeholder. I mean, we could, in a couple of months, I think we could do some reallocations perhaps after we take a look and see what some of these, but for me to get a handle on it.
Okay.
I don't feel like I've got my arms wrapped around it yet. And just to say, yeah, get rid of the 100,000. Well, I'm not quite sure what's out there and what we're putting in or what we've committed. And I mean, if there's other funding that's already promised to do some of these safety things and school things or whatever, that's great. But if we've made a commitment and the funding's not there, I'd like to know that. So I'd like to keep it there as a placeholder for right now as a committee member. Not sure how the others are.
I would leave it there until we're somewhat similar to what I'll call the match on the MD10A. Till we figure out that we don't need it, let's leave it there. And if we figure out a good project to utilize it on, even if it's in one of the other 3 communities we mentioned or elsewhere, we should utilize it that way. It's a pretty small percentage of the overall cash amount.
I'm not married to it one way or the other. Just wanted to let you know my thoughts.
How about the 2 committee members sitting in front of me?
I prefer to keep it in there for now, as well.
Very good. So do we, so let's take a final look at what we've discussed and just take a look at it. So when we make a motion, we can, we know what we're making a motion on or motion for recommendation for board presentation.
Clerk of the board, would you mind projecting my laptop screen? Right. So what we have right now, as best as I could tabulate it, is under the committee recommendation column, maintains the 100,000 investments in the Spanish community. I took the 180,000 for the North Fork and for the Eastern Madera County Foundation out of the projects to help address homelessness. Maintain the 23-24 general fund deficit offset at the same amount. Reduce the 24-25 preservation general fund services by 1.7 to redirect that to fully fund phase 1 of the MD10A project. And then MD1 Hidden Lakes water system remains the same as recommended for a total of $8,277,003.
Okay, very good. We have the committee recommendation. Is there somebody, any members of the public have any comments? Seeing and hearing none, I'll accept the motion for action from a committee member who is committed to moving forward with a committee recommendation.
I'll make a motion to approve the updated committee recommendation as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Wamhaugh,
Yes.
Member Varney,
Yes.
Member Begay,
Yes.
Member Leon,
Yes.
and Supervisor Poitras.
Yes.
Vote passes. So that's 5-0.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Good discussion.